Blog Talk Radio.
All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Women of Golf. I'm your host, Ted Odorico, and of course, joining me this morning, as she does every Tuesday morning, is probably one of the hardest working women in the LPGA profession, Cindy Miller. Cindy, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Ted. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's another Tuesday morning. Of course, we just wrapped up the first long weekend of the season, Memorial Weekend. Hopefully everybody had a safe and happy Memorial Weekend. And we want to give a special thanks to all those men and women, of course, that work so hard to protect this great nation here. So we want to thank you very much for all of your continued support in doing that. And Cindy, I know we've got another great show here. Let me just remind everybody, though, before we get going here, that we are live every Tuesday mornings here on blogtalkradio.com at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. That's on the Blog Talk Radio Network, and you just simply go to that link at www.blogtalkradio.com, and you can either type in /Women of Golf, or you can just search it up in the search key up above, and that'll bring you right to our show every morning, every Tuesday morning. And if you want to speak to Cindy and I during the live broadcast every Tuesday morning, you can do so by calling area code 347-945-5855, or you can email your questions to womenofgolf@gmail.com. But Cindy has been bringing a great series to the show every week for the last couple of weeks now, and we're into actually day 3. And she's brought another one called Own Your Game, Part 3, if you will. And this one is Change Your Game from the Inside Out. So let's talk a little bit about that first before we actually get right into it, and explain a little bit more about what you're talking about here, just for the listeners.
Well, when you're playing golf or you're giving a lesson or anytime you're trying to play the game, the ball ends up being the evidence of what you've done with the club. And your score is the evidence of what you've done with the ball throughout your round. And when people get frustrated or have doubt or indecision or apprehension, it all comes from the control tower, if you will, with your head, of your head telling your body what you want to do. So, again, everybody looks at the ball and wants to know, well, why did it go there? Well, then you have to backtrack and say, okay, well, why did it go there, and what did I do with the club? And what I did with the club was determined by what my thoughts in my head were. So it all boils down to the control tower of, well, what did you do? And that would be from the inside of you.
Right, exactly. And let me just quickly add before we continue on, Cindy, I forgot one. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, and I apologize. I forgot to mention this earlier, but a little bit later in the show, of course, we're going to be joined by none other than Cindy's husband, Alan Miller, who is a very prominent member of the PGA and Champions Tour over the years, is a great instructor as well. And he's going to be joining us a little bit later in the show, so I apologize for forgetting to mention that. But okay, Cindy, let's start right off here if we can. And one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, what does it take to improve? Let's start from there.
Well, and that would go back to week number 1 when we said, well, why are you playing? And you need to know your reason why. If it's just for recreation and if it's just for fun or family time or you're trying to play with the kids on the weekend, then you wouldn't really have to work as hard at improvement as you would if you wanted to play competitively at your club or win the club championship or your class division and or play in college or ultimately play on the LPGA or the tour. So what does it take to improve depends on what your number one, the number one mission is why am I playing? Given that reason why, then you have to sit down and say, okay, if I'm going to just play for fun on the weekends and I don't want to embarrass myself,
right.
or I want to play for corporate, business golf, you really, if you shoot 110 or lower and you move along and you can hit the ball 100 yards straight down the fairway, that's sufficient to play in a corporate charity outing. So again, what is your reason? And then we would determine what you would need to do to be able to get to that level. But it all boils down to thought control and mind management of what am I doing. We teach an awful lot of boot camps where we teach people in the morning and then we take them out on the golf course in the afternoon. And the biggest challenge I see with people is knowing what to think, when, where, and how
right.
to plan and prepare to be able to produce a golf shot. And when you're out on the course, you have multiple opportunities or challenges. Each time you set up to the ball, it's a new challenge. So if you look at that when you're playing as, I get a new challenge here, well, then you're not really listening to the gerbil in your head saying, oh, you stupid idiot, I can't believe you just missed the ball over there. And, again, what are you thinking about? If you're not paying attention to the shot or the task at hand, then you're in the past or the future. Oh, I'm 3 under par. What if I birdie or bogey, the next 3 holes, I'll break 80 for the first time. Again, you're not focusing on the task at hand. So I think it's thought control and mind management, and that's probably the biggest issue that I see in students.
Right, and I think, and obviously this goes hand in hand, but, the other thing, too, is too many people, you hit it right on the head, too many people focus on, whether they're going to break 80 or not. They're focusing on the score or what they need to do over the next 3 holes instead of focusing on what they need to do right now. And as you say, the shot at hand or the task at hand, and they get too far down the field. And even some of the pros, I think, get caught up in that from time to time, if they're in a heated competition and they're thinking about what they need to do down the road. And sometimes that can be more of a detriment to your game as well. So that's certainly important. Obviously, one of the number one things that you have to do is you have to really know your game, I think, to put it bluntly. You have to understand what your abilities are and what you're able to do, and also what your tendencies, for instance, whether you're hitting it thin, whether you're hitting it fat, left or right. So let's talk a little bit about that if we can, Cindy.
Well, you're absolutely right. And if you don't know what your tendencies are, then you can't really fix them. Everybody has a pile, if you will, or they all have tendencies.
Yeah.
My tendency is to come out of a shot to try to help the shot. So if I don't finish my task, I will not get what I want. And again, the beautiful thing about the game of golf is there's consequences. And in life, a lot of people will argue with kids nowadays, there's no consequence. Everybody gets to win a prize. Well, in the game of golf, you don't.
Right.
So if you come up, again, it's hard to do this without a visual, but
sure.
Hitting it fat would be hitting the ground way behind the ball. And you hit it fat when you move forward with something besides the club head, which is typically your body or your hands. So you would dig to China, if you will. If you hit it clean,
Yep.
That's hitting at the bottom of the arc, and that's perfect clean contact. If you hit it thin, you either stand up or you lock your arms. You hit the ball above the bottom of the arc, bottom of the ball. If you top it, you come up more than a little bit, and if you whiff it, you come up a lot and totally miss the ball. The catch is that people will tell you have to keep your head down, your left arm straight, shift and turn, hit the ball, follow through, but they don't tell you how to hit it clean on purpose. And it's like a pendulum swinging back and forth. You have to allow the arms, hands, wrists, and arms to swing the club head in a pendulum motion rather than moving the body back and through and not paying attention to the club face. The club face is the only thing that touches the ball. So the thing about golf is that you could be listening to the committee of they telling you you're lifting your head, you're bending your elbow, but they're not telling you how to hit the ball clean. So now you're chasing a gerbil, and there's no way you're going to improve.
Right.
It's you're thinking that they're telling you good information when in reality they're not telling you good information, and they're not giving you the cure for the cause. So, again, you have to stop and say, okay, where's the ball going? Why is the ball going where it's going? And how can I change what I do with the club face to fix it?
Right, and let me just add to this this part of the segment. To know your game and to really understand how you play. I think one of the biggest problems that most amateurs have is they don't spend enough time practicing out away from the golf course, and I mean that in the sense that obviously you need to go to the golf course, whether it be a range at the course or a private facility, but too many people want to monkey around and toy with their game while they're in the middle of a round, and that's not the right place to do it. You need to do it in a practice facility and in a calm, sort of cool, collected environment. And I think to really understand and know your game, you need to spend that time. And most people today, unfortunately, are not doing that. And that's, I think, one of the challenges that most instructors have is trying to, we can teach them and show them all the things we want, but if they're not going to put it into practice and work on those skills, then they're going to have a difficult time really understanding and knowing what their abilities are. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I understand that life is moving, at Mach 10, and people really don't have that much time. Again, that would go back to why are you playing? So if you only want to play recreationally or a casual business round or a charity golf outing, then you need to find a couple of keys that you can think of every time you get ready to hit a shot. Here's my own personal process. And if you don't invest the time and energy to find your own personal process, then you can't get upset because you have no idea what you're doing. Therefore, you can't be consistent. So you must, invest the time depending on the goal. Let's say you're going to play in a charity golf outing in 2 weeks. I would take 2 or 3 private lessons before that and say to the instructor, I need to find my own personal process of what am I going to do every time I get ready to hit a shot. How do I figure out what club to use? How do I aim? How do I make the ball go from point A to point B?
Right, exactly. And because you have maybe a situation where people, as you said, are going at Mach 10 today, they don't have as much time, so they need to be a little bit more diligent in whatever time that they do have and make the best use of time. And that's a great way right there, is just to, take 2 or 3 lessons from a qualified instructor and get them to help you focus on those key areas. That's a great point.
Even if you, again, we just did a boot camp in Orlando at the Waldorf Astoria this past weekend, and the skill level of all these players, only one really could have broken 100, but the other 3 play golf for business. And once they knew what their process was, we take them out on the golf course and play with them. And it's like every time you get to a shot, you have to shift states. We can be talking and having a good time. Now it's your turn to hit. Boom. And on tour, you have 45 seconds to hit the ball from when it's your turn. So you really need to know, what am I doing in these 45 seconds? And you can bump the ball down the fairway with a hybrid. You don't need a driver off the tee if you're going to hit it crooked. You can bunt the ball down the fairway with a hybrid if you're a woman, or a 7-iron if you had to, if you were a man, and just hit it straight down the fairway, chip it up, and 2-putt. And you can make bogey or double bogey. And if you add that up, double bogey on every hole is 108. And that's not bad for not knowing what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an excellent point, because, there's a lot of golfers out there today, that are still sort of, especially the men, and I'm going to throw myself under the bus here, as a male. But a lot of men are still under this mentality they've got to pull out their driver every hole and grip it and rip it, so to speak. And the problem is it just gets them into a myriad of problems, and they think strategy, and they don't think, okay, I know I can't hit my driver very well, so let's put it back in the bag and let's, whether it be a 7-iron or even a hybrid club, just something that I can play with a little bit more confidence and just get it into play and set myself up for that next shot. And a lot of them are still under that mentality. I think that's why a lot of them get frustrated.
Well, exactly, and that would go back to day 2 of Own Your Game. Day 1, why am I playing? Day 2, what do I want? So if you want to score better, you may not be able to use your driver. If you want to hit your driver better, then you've got to give away scoring better. Now, if you want to use your driver and score better, then you need to invest more time in practice. So is it a realistic goal or expectation, or do you think, is your goal confused and it's not realistic and for the time you're willing to invest in perfecting your game? So, again, I might play well as a senior LPGA Tour player on the Legends Tour. I may be able to finish in the top 10 of a Legends Tour event, but I cannot finish. I don't have the ability to finish in the top 10 at an LPGA Tour event. And you might say, well, why? Well, I just don't hit it far enough. It's not realistic. Give it up. Yeah. You can't accomplish that task.
Right, and just to take a sort of a note from history, if you look at some of the great players that have come along, you look at somebody like Jack Nicklaus. There came a point in time in his career when he knew that he was not going to be able to compete the way that he felt he needed to compete on the PGA, and he bowed out gracefully at that point. And of course, he has played on a few of the Champions Tour events over the years, but there came a point in time when he knew his game well enough that he said, okay, Jack, I've maxed out my abilities to be able to compete effectively in this arena. Now it's time to sort of step aside and move on to other things. And he did that, and that takes a lot, and it's not easy for somebody to do, especially of somebody of Jack's stature who has played golf from such an early age and at such a high ability to be able to do that. But that's really what we're saying here is you really have to understand, you have to know your game and be realistic in what it is that you're doing and be able to work effectively in whatever areas that need help with. So that's just an example there of somebody that knew their game and made adjustments accordingly. And that's really what you're talking about is what your abilities are when you're playing on the Legends Tour, and to take that onto the LPGA would be a whole different kettle of fish. So you're realistic enough to understand that, okay, I can compete to a point, but it's not going to be to the desired level that I would like, so I'm not going to. I'm going to go where I know where my strengths are.
Exactly. So again, the U.S. Kids Golf has got a great program. What they do is they allow 5-year-olds to compete in tournaments, and they move the tees way up so that at each level and age group, these kids are able to break par because they make the length of the course coordinate with the age of the child so that they can hit a green in regulation. Because, when I grew up playing, we had to hit from the ladies' tees, which if you only hit the ball 100 yards, you were going to make doubles and triples and quadruples, and you weren't getting used to being able to break par. And so if you're not breaking par, then it might be a goal that you're either pursuing or protecting, and that changes your mindset. So, everybody's got to stop and say, well, I really want to break 100. Well, do you play from tees that you can break 100? So I see a lot of senior men trying to play the blue tees, which makes the course real long. Well, why would you do that? Why would you not move up to the gold tees or the green tees or somewhere closer so you can reach the green? And I think that is a big deal in amateur golf, that people should really move up. So example being this weekend, I played from the ladies' tees at the Waldorf Astoria. Now, it probably shouldn't because I hit the ball for the most ladies. But on the other hand,
Right.
I was 2 under par with 3 holes to go. And I said, hey, you haven't broken 70 in a long time. Let's try to make a birdie. Instead of, don't blow this, you're under par. I birdied 16 and parred 17 and 18, shot 69. I'm like, oh, good job. And then the little gerbil said, well, you ought to break 70. You played it so short. Well, it doesn't matter. You still, why don't you pat yourself on the back, you idiot?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's so true. That's I like that. Cindy, let's move on if we can to sort of the next area, and that's to really know your strengths and weaknesses. And there's really 3 things that fall hand in hand here: is understanding your mental toughness, thought control, and focus on the task at hand, which I know you talked a little bit about. But let's delve into, if we can, a little bit about strengths and weakness.
Well, again, people need to learn to own themselves and know who they are. And I'm working on something that hopefully will be done in the next couple of weeks for one of our sessions to allow people to take an assessment to find out truly who they are and what their behavior style is. Because, again, there's 4 behavior styles. There's one where you're the influencer or the sanguine, if you will, personality that's having fun and doesn't really like to focus and concentrate, and that would be Christina Kim or Peter Jacobson, if you will. The next one is a control freak, which would be Tiger Woods, Suzanne Pedersen, which is a high D-driven person. The next one would be melancholy or C, a cautious, perfectionist, analytical person. And the last one would be the steady pace, Jason Duffner person. But you need to know who you are and what your tendencies are and your strengths and weaknesses. So I happen to be a high D, which would be the Suzanne Pedersen, Tiger Woods type person. So my normal way I do things is let's move it, let's go, efficient, got to fire at the pin. Well, that's great, Cindy, to fire at the pin, but what if you have a shot that you really don't have the ability for and you bury it in the bunker up against the lip and you make triple? So I need to be able to weigh the odds of risk-reward depending on my ability, and do I have a 50% chance of pulling this shot off, and am I mentally tough enough and let my ego go so that I can play it smarter and avoid a stupid mistake? Again, you need to know who you are. On the other hand, let's say you're the high S, which is a steady person, they don't want to fire at the pin. They just want to hit it in the fairway and hit it on the green and two-putt everywhere, and they don't take many risks. Well, they'll probably shoot. They won't make a lot of doubles and triples. They'll just make a lot of bogeys, which to them is okay because it's consistent. So if you know yourself, it's much easier to unlock or solve the puzzle, if you will. Would you agree?
Yeah, I agree exactly, and that's and really your strengths and weaknesses. Just you talk about mental toughness. This is where things like that and your thought control really come into play. I mean, you have to be focused on what you're doing, and you have to have the mental toughness to be able to handle whatever adversities might come up on the golf course. Because there's always going to be something that's going to happen. Whether, as you said, getting into a bunker, up against a lip. And you have to have that mental toughness, and that's something that really comes over time as we develop our skills and life really in general, not just golf, but particularly in golf. But I think really understanding your strengths and what your abilities are, having that knowledge, if you will, before you get out on the golf course makes a world of difference. I think that would be something that most people need a lot of work on, especially the average amateur.
Absolutely. And again, you may not know what that is. But the other thing, it would come back to, why am I playing? And for me, I love being outside. I love the personal challenge. So if you're one of those people who loves the challenge because there's no one to blame except yourself, then
Mm-hmm.
you might say, well, I'm going to change my mindset here, and I'm going to look at this as each time I get on the golf course, and every shot I stand up to, I have the opportunity for a personal challenge to be able to see if I'm able to compete or complete the task at hand. You know, what's my best play from this situation? And like you just said, it's like in golf on the course, and it is in life. What am I going to do? What are my options here? Inspect the options. Well, I could go under the branches. I could go over the branches. I could try to cut it or hook it, or, you know, I could scull it on purpose. I could hit my driver off the deck to hit it underneath all the branches. You know, some people may not look at all their options before they make a decision.
Right, and that, you know, is something I think really what we're trying to say is you know, once you've made the decision and the commitment as to what type of golfer you want to be, whether it's just a recreation one, you know, once in a blue moon, or whether you want to be more competitive, I think once you've established that, then that's going to dictate the pattern of where you're going to go from there, and you know, whether you're going to really commit to your practice time and commit to getting proper instruction and that sort of thing, and commit to your game overall. And once you start doing these things, and you know, these areas start to unfold, then you start to develop. It's just like in life, you know, when you have certain levels of education, as you become more educated, you become more skilled in certain things, and that's really what you know, what we want to do here with golf is we want to prepare you as instructors to play your best game, but you have to own your game by understanding what it is and where your strengths and weaknesses are. And the only way you can do that is to get out and play the game and have a little fun, of course, along the way. But we'll actually have a lot of fun along the way. Cindy, I think now would be a good time. I see that he's ready here. I'd like to bring our guest on today, and I'd like to have him join in on some of the conversation as well. So why don't you do the honors of bringing on Alan?
Well, I have been married to this wonderful man for 32 years. I met him at the University of Miami when a mutual friend was caddying for him at the Doral Eastern Open on the PGA Tour. We became golf buddies, and we both were playing on the LPGA Tour and the PGA Tour together after I got out of college. And we got married in 1981. And we have 3 beautiful children. My husband, Alan Miller, played on the PGA Tour for 15 years, was ranked the number 1 and 2 amateur for 2 years in a row by Golf Digest and Golf World Magazine. He has played in 2 Walker Cup teams, a World Cup team, many PGA championships, 5 Masters championships, and is ranked by Dave Pelz as the second purest ball striker he has ever tested. Please welcome my honey, Alan Miller.
Good morning.
Good morning, Alan. Welcome to the Women of Golf. We appreciate you giving us some time this morning. Well, I don't think you could have laid it out any better than that. I don't think Cindy could have laid it out any better than that.
She could have kept on going for a while. That sounded pretty good to me.
Well, I must tell you, when I asked him to marry me, it threw my head that I get free lessons for life.
And it's working out that way, too.
It is working out that way. Thank you.
I'd love to do it.
Alan, I don't know if you've been listening to the earlier part of the show, but of course Cindy's in part 3 of a segment that she started called Own Your Game. I'm sure you're aware of it. I wanted to bring you on a few minutes earlier just to sort of get some of your thoughts on this. The first segment, of course, we were talking about, you know, really to know your game, and then we talked about strengths and weaknesses. Let's go back, if we will, a little bit when you were playing on tour and that. Was there sort of a time when you really started to know and understand your game?
Well, it took my golf swing itself. Once I worked with Mr. Bob Toski for changing my whole game in 6 days, which we'll get into probably, I knew my swing pretty well, but being able to use it is where the problem comes in, because you can teach somebody to swing a club, but you can't teach them how to use it, or you can't make them use it, would be a better way to say it. And
right.
Until you know yourself better and better, and sometimes you don't know it's a way later in life, which is kind of what happened to me. You don't know why you do things, or you know what you need to do to improve on what you can do, and sometimes people just take a long time to figure that out. So I knew a lot about my golf swing, but I didn't know why I couldn't use it as well as I could sometimes, or why in other times that I seemed to be able to use it, and then all of a sudden it would fall apart.
Right. And what do you think, looking back now, now you obviously are a much more seasoned player and coach, of course, but what do you feel were some of your strengths and what were some of your weaknesses along through your career that you came to realize?
Well, golf game-wise, my swing-wise, I was always a very accurate player. I had a big hook before I changed my swing, and I became a straight to a slight left to right player with Bob Toski's help. So I always kept it in play really well. Very seldom did I hit it out of play or miss a lot of greens. It was nothing for me to hit 18 greens in regulation in a tournament or in a round of golf. The problem was if I hit 18 greens, I usually shot even par because I two-putted everything. I grew up on and down where you are in Florida, North Florida, and the greens weren't very good back in my day. And your first goal was always just to get it close. You never thought much about making putts, where today's greens are so good that people learn how to make putts early. But I think the thing that held me back the most was I always was trying to not let other people down. And that's part of owning your game and knowing what you can do with knowing yourself. Every time I hit a bad shot, I felt like I was letting somebody else down. And that, over the years, ate at me more and more. And, again, it was part of the reason I had problems in life later. But at the same time, if I hadn't let that kind of bother me, maybe been a little more selfish, you know what, I don't care what you guys think or whatever, I would have become a greater player than I was, even though I survived for 15 years, and which is quite an feat in itself to last as long as I did. But I never became a superstar that Golf Digest had said we would be before I started out.
Right.
What
Alan,
what, honey? I think you should tell the listeners about what you did when you changed your game. We did not really go into that. We alluded to it here, but I would tell them when you decided you really needed to get better and get to the next level.
Okay. Well, in 1968, I finished 8th in the United States Amateur at Scioto Country Club in Columbus, Ohio, and that's a course that Jack Nicklaus grew up on. In fact, Jack spoke at the U.S. Amateur banquet there, and Jack Grout, his only teacher until he passed away, was a head professional. Anyway, long story short, the top 8 in the United States Amateur in those days, this is 1968, qualified to play in the Masters because Bobby Jones was still alive and he wanted a lot of amateurs playing. So if you finished 8th in the Amateur, you automatically got in the Masters the next year. Well, I was coming down the stretch and I was trying to finish in the top 8 because I was right at the borderline there, having a good tournament, no chance to win. Bruce Fleischer ended up winning. But I lived in a deathly fear. I used to hit a big roundhouse hook, okay, and I was taught basically the really old school golf, Bobby Jones there, where you you aim to the right, and you swung in and out and around, inside out was called back those days, and you hit a big hook, you flip the club over, supinate, pronate was old golf terms for that. But I lived in a deathly fear of two things. Number one, because I was hitting a big hook, I had to aim further and further right. The more the pressure got on me, the more I aimed to the right and tried to hit a bigger hook. Well, I lived in a deathly fear of leaving the ball way right, not hooking it at all, missing the green way right of the fairway. Or if I overdid it or overcooked it, I'd hit it way left and hit a duck hook. So I lived in a deathly fear of missing right and left. Well, I had analyzed golfers from Ben Hogan to Jack Nicklaus on down, watching them on television and live or whatever whenever you had a chance to go to a golf tournament. I watched the great ball strikers all hit it basically straight or a little left to right. I'm not meaning necessarily the greatest players, but the greatest ball strikers, the ones that hit a lot of fairways and greens. So I knew I had to get rid of that big roundhouse hook. Well, long story short, I did finish okay. I got it on the green somehow, living in constant fear on the last day of the U.S. Amateur, and I did qualify for the Masters. But right after that tournament was over, I said to my dad, I got to get rid of this hook. I've got to change my swing. And I kind of knew what I wanted to look like. I just didn't know how to do it. So long story short, for the time's sake, I ended up going to see Bob Toski in Florida. Two other named teachers had said they didn't have time and whatever. So my dad saw Mr. Toski, and he said, my son wants to come see you. He said, well, I'm pretty busy. Well, that's what the other two teachers said. Well, so tell me about him. He said, well, he's going to play in the U.S. He's going to play in the Masters next fall. He said, what? Get him on the next plane down here. So I flew to Miami the next day. Bob Toski met me at the Miami airport, took me to his house. We cooked steaks at his house with his wife, Lynn, and one of his kids. there's two assistants that come up, and we all had dinner there. Then I went down to stay with assistants in Key Largo, Florida, at Ocean Ridge Country Club. The next morning, Toski met me at 8 in the morning, and we hit balls nonstop for 2 days. I asked him if he wanted to see a swing, some movies, not videos. We didn't have video in those days. Some movies of me swinging. He looked at me right in the eye and said, "Nope, we're going to get to work right now." I hit 5 balls. He said, "Alan, you've got good hand-eye coordination, good timing and rhythm. Let's get to work." In the next 2 days, I changed my whole swing entirely from big roundhouse to down, which would be Ben Hogan's way, would be everything on target line as long as possible, a lot of release. Long story short, I went from hitting a big roundhouse hook to hitting it pretty doggone straight or a little left to right. The next 2 years, I was number 2 amateur in the United States, and I ended up being 3rd in the world amateur tournament. And I don't remember what I shot at the Masters, but I know I got really, really good as a ball striker at that point. I didn't look at it as the risk of changing my swing. I looked at it as the need to get better, because if I had to play golf the rest of my life in a constant fear of missing it way right or way left, then it wasn't worth playing anymore. Golf was not meant to be life or death. And I knew that great ball strikers didn't have that problem. And looking back later, Ben Hogan went through the same scenario. He had changed his whole swing from a big hook to basically what I had done. So I knew that I couldn't get any better doing what I had already done. So I was willing to take the time and effort to change. And I'd be very honest with you, it was very difficult. And I finally had to take control of myself when I was down there with Bob, because he kept telling me what to do and my body wouldn't listen. So I finally had to over-exaggerate. But I was bound and determined to get better. And that's basically the story of what happened. I did not want to play golf anymore if I had to play the way I was.
Right. And why do you think, Alan, you've had the opportunity both on and off the course, and I mean that in tournament play and also, why do you think that so many golfers out there really struggle with their game? What do you think are some of the top reasons that you see them struggling?
Yeah, well, the average player is not willing to put in the time and effort it takes to develop or make changes in their games. Whether it's a time constraint, I shouldn't say willing, but some people don't have the time to be able to do it. Some people think it should be very simple. Golf is like anything else, any other business or anything else. You start at the bottom and you work your way up. And through that process, right, it takes a lot of hard work to do it. And most people have very unrealistic expectations of what they could be doing. And they say, first comment comes out of most people's mouth, how come I can't do it every time? Guess what? Nobody else ever has nor ever will. They don't realize that golf is as hard as it is, and I think that holds people back more than anything else, is their expectations are, I should be able to do this right away, and it's going to take a lot of work if you want to change something or develop something into better. A lot of people also just play recreational golf, and they really don't want to work. They want a quick fix, and unfortunately, quick fixes are usually Band-Aids. They go away in no time, and they're constantly keeping coming back, and that's what keeps golf professionals in business sometimes, is quick fixes, Band-Aids, and it keeps the revenue flowing. I personally refuse to give somebody a Band-Aid. If they're not willing to, if they want a Band-Aid, they can go somewhere else. I'm going to make them, give them the necessary tools to develop their golf swing. The rest of it's up to them, but most people aren't willing to take the work, put in the work to get better, and then they're not willing to look at themselves and, how come I can't do that? I said, you know what? I don't know why you can't do that. You can. I don't know why you aren't, that kind of stuff. So I think they have to look at themselves and be realistic about how long it's going to take or how much work it might take to get better at what they're doing.
Right, and I think one of the other, you raised a valid point, a Band-Aid solution, and I think that unfortunately, much of the equipment out there is wonderful as it is to see this technology. I think people look towards the equipment to solving their issues, and a lot of times that equipment is not going to get to the root of the problem. And unless they're willing to put that time and effort in, as you suggest, they're not going to see, other than maybe a very modest and temporary change to their golf game. Alan,
That's very true. Let me interject something about that, because where we are, and you see all the TrackMans and all this stuff, and invariably people go in and say, I got this problem, my swing or whatever, I need a club to fix it. Well, guess what? even their bad swings aren't consistent. So getting a golf club fitted to you with a bad swing is not going to do you any good more than for a week or whatever, because 2 weeks from now you're not going to be swinging the same way if you got a bad swing that you were when you bought the club. So that's going to go away. When my students want to get a new club, first thing I tell them is we're going to let you try it. You got to feel it. It's got to look good. Then we'll play around with the shafts that go in it, and then you can get on TrackMan or whatever. And I need to be there to tell you if that was a good swing before you get honest feedback of what the club's doing for you.
Right. I think, unfortunately, the way things have gone in the industry, certainly some good, some bad, but I think that there's been just too much, push on technology. And don't get me wrong, I think technology is great, and it certainly can help. But I think that too many people get caught up in the numbers, and I'm talking about the amateurs now, caught up in the numbers and that sort of thing, and they don't really understand what that information is. And more often than not, it actually ends up making it more difficult than what it really needs to be. Golf, as you said, is certainly a difficult game, but I think this is what brings the level of frustration up, is simply getting a Band-Aid to sort of fix the problem.
Well, exactly.
Alan,
technology can help you get better, but it's not going to fix any problems.
Right, exactly. And I'm much like you. I'm very old school. I believe that you have to get out there and work at it. And obviously, everybody, depending on part of the own your game philosophy is you really have to understand first off what game you want to play. If you just want to sort of be a one time once in a while, or whether you want to be a little more competitive, is going to dictate how much time you're going to input into the game. But given the fact that you've had the pleasure of playing on tour for 15 plus years, you've seen a lot of different people. What were some of the things on the tour that you saw that gave you pause to think, okay, I need to think a little bit more like that, or I need to adapt more of that in my game? Was there anything that stands out that you can think of?
Well, to be very honest with you, I think that can be a downfall for a lot of players, because I did do that. Well, what is Tiger, what is Jack Nicklaus doing different than what I do mentally or whatever, or what is Lee Trevino doing differently than what I do or whatever? And you know what? They're two different types of people, and you need to know who you are first. And that's why Cindy and I are so big on the personalities and learning about yourself, because if you try to be, I'm a Jason Duffner style in today's players lingo, okay? Mm-hmm. And if I try to make myself perform and play and think like Jack Nicklaus or Tiger Woods today, that's going to be a big downfall for me. And to be honest with you, it was a downfall for me. I would go, what's wrong with me? Why come I can't do what they're doing? You tell a person like me or Jason Duffner that they're not trying hard enough and they need to try to win, you can bet they're going to shoot 80, or they're going to play terrible. If you can pat them on the back and say, you know what, I know you're working really hard. It'll all fall into place sooner or later. You just keep doing it, keep plugging away, you'll be okay. I'm more likely to play well. Well, I tried to be somebody I wasn't. And when you try to be somebody you aren't, that's when problems start arising, not only in your golf game, but in your life also. So sometimes we look at other people and wish we could be there rather than reach inside of us and see, how can I become the best me? But before I can become the best me, I got to know who I am first and more about me.
Right. Right, and I think that's an area that probably 99.9% of people out there in all walks of life, not just in the golf arena, but I think all walks of life have difficulties with. And I think that once we start to take a look within ourselves, and as Cindy very eloquently put as this segment, change your game from the inside out. Once we understand who we are and what it is that we want to do and how to sort of make that come to fruition, then we're going to enjoy the game much more. I think a lot of people, and this has been part of the reason I think why there's been a decline. Obviously, time has been an issue, money has been an issue, but I think a lot of people out of frustration because they haven't taken the time to really understand their game. They're too busy. And that's why I posed that question to you. I knew the answer, but I posed that question. I think too many people are trying to assimilate their life into somebody else's life, and once you do that, you've lost really half the battle. Cindy, I want to get you to jump back in here because I know you're still actively playing on the Legends Tour and that. Do you see a lot of that when you're out there as well, where other competitors are trying to the else's game into theirs?
Absolutely not. And again, I think it's because it's the Legends Tour. We've learned that lesson. Now, in high school, with all the juniors that we teach, and this may be, definitely our passion. We want to help save these kids from the criticism of their parents, if you will, and teach these juniors to be their own best person. Because if you are a Jason Duffner and you have a Tiger Woods father, that father's going to tell the Jason Duffner child, you got to try harder, you got to do this, and that kid's going to think he's worthless and can't live up to someone else's expectation. And we see that all the time. I mean, all you have to do is go to a junior tournament, and you can see these parents. I mean, we tell them, we're going to ban you and duct tape your mouth. You must get out of here. They do not want to see your body language of hanging your head when the kid makes a bogey or a double. They're out there trying the hardest they can. Again, our biggest deal is we have never, ever met anyone who has tried to miss it on purpose. You trying to screw this up? Of course not. So, again, that would go to, okay, well, why is the ball going where it's going? Well, what am I thinking? What am I doing? And what am I trying to do? So when you get to the Legends Tour, I'm not saying that all these people didn't think that thought, try to compare themselves to other competitors early on. Of course they did. And I used to. I used to hang out with Joanne Carter all the time and sit there and watch her hit balls. And she came to our wedding. What's wrong with me? And why can't I do this? And it's been a lifelong pursuit. And now, again, you hate to say you're trying to grow up at an old age, but you're trying to grow up and get rid of all these battle scars. And if you have a husband or a wife that's totally different from you, and they're criticizing you and how you're playing and what you're scoring, you got to stop. It's not going to help you.
You're talking about a few minutes ago the rise and fall of the game going on. Well, I know the statistics show that it's fallen down, but historically it's not changed what it's done. The fact is that it is because of the economy, the situations we're all having. It's too expensive to play golf most places and everything else. But historically, golf has had the largest turnover of people start and stop the game. Why? Because they have those unrealistic expectations. It looks so easy when you watch somebody like Cindy or I do it, or yourself probably, because it looks easy. And they all of a sudden they try. They say, I didn't know it was going to be this hard. And any professional athlete will tell you it's the hardest sport they've ever played. So because it looks so easy, they will end up giving up very early because they had unrealistic expectations how much it was going to work, how it was going to work. And golf is like anything else in life. I don't care what it is. It's a barrel of life. Friend Arnold Palmer used to say it's an image of your soul. It takes hard work to get anywhere, whether it's in golf, to be a doctor or a banker or whatever. It takes a lot of work, and people just aren't willing to put in the time and effort it takes because it looks so simple. Then they get frustrated, and that's what's hurting the game of golf more than anything else, is that people would understand it's going to be a process, and I think more people would stick with it longer.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And it goes back to time management. You have to decide in life what it is where you want to focus your time. I mean, when you look at some of the youngsters coming up, they're spending their time in front of a computer or a video game or what have you, and they're not really doing anything. When I was growing up, the words that resonate in my mind was Dad said, "Get out of the house." He didn't want us sitting in front of the TV. He wanted us out doing things. And that was just, obviously it was that generation. And we had to invent things, and we had to get out and do things. And I remember before I even ever played on an official golf course, my buddies and I used to take a few golf clubs, and we would go up to our local. We had a very large park where I grew up, and we had a bunch of soccer fields, and we would use the goalposts at the various fields, and we would hit back and forth, and of course use that as our unofficial holes, if you will, until we were a little bit older and were able to get out on the golf course. But I got a good one for you. I'll tell you how old I am. When I started, I had a park just like you were talking about, but I didn't have any golf tees, so I used to take clothespins that had the spring in the middle, pull the spring out, use both sides of that clothespin, hammer it in the ground to make a tee. Wow.
Yeah, that's how old I am. They had just invented the spring, I think.
I had that one. That's a good one. Guys, I want to bring in the sort of the last segment of today's show with Cindy, the sort of the final part of the segment here, and that's playing without fear. And I'm going to get both of you to chime in. And of course, we're going to go with ladies first, your baby, but playing without fear, and obviously it's having the ability to stare it in the face and learn to overcome it. Talk about some things on how we need to play without fear and some of the things that we need to get ourselves ready, prepared for.
Well, you need to be aware that you might be afraid. And the funny thing is, I applied to be on the first women's big break 10 years ago. I saw the email and thought, oh, maybe I should do this. And the little voice in my head said, oh, that's stupid. They'll never pick you. And then the other little voice said, well, if you really want to win a Legends Tour event and you're standing over a shot on the 18th hole and you had to hit a shot over water with thousands of people watching you and you were leading a tournament, you know you would throw up. And I was like, yes, I know that I absolutely would. So being aware that you would be afraid is the first step. The second step is learning to follow your process. And so I am so grateful that I had the opportunity to be on 2 big breaks and a few other Golf with Style shows on the Golf Channel, because it really helped me learn to focus on the task at hand. You cannot control what you're, the outcome. You can only control what you're doing. So I continue to play on the Legends Tour. I love the challenge of seeing if I can hit a shot, as I would say, with a gun to my head, and I'm the one that's holding the trigger. Are you going to blow yourself up, or are you going to pull it off? So I love the challenge of that, and you'll hear players say, we work our whole lives for this moment. So you need to embrace the privilege of the pressure and not try to avoid it.
Yeah, and the fear itself is all self-imposed anyway. I mean, I have a little saying, you're not what you shoot. If people realize that their score doesn't dictate who they are or what kind of person they are, the fear itself is letting yourself, for most people, let yourself down. They're scared they're going to fail rather than trying to think, well, what do I need to do to go ahead and perform a proven task? And if they can overcome that, then it becomes a lot simpler to play golf or get better at anything, actually. But the fear is all self-imposed. Like Churchill said, I think it was Churchill, you have nothing to fear but fear itself. Fear can be a fear of winning, a fear of losing. It could be whatever it is. But, again, that's where you have to know what is your fear and why. The why behind the what is very important. I mean, there were times where I had shots as a professional or an amateur to keep the fear from creeping in there. I would say to myself, well, I've hit this shot before. Here's a visual. I visualize me having a shot similar to some other circumstance, and just try to think about the good outcome or whatever I did positive to make it happen. And if you can keep those positive thoughts in your head instead of saying, oh, don't do this and don't do that, and just think about the task at hand and what you need to do to perform that task, then the fear becomes much simpler to handle.
Right.
Alan, tell us about
Cindy, go ahead.
2017 when you won the Tallahassee Open. Because that was like a do-or-die situation, and I think maybe the listeners might appreciate that story.
I missed the first part of what you said.
Tell us about the 17th hole
at
the Tallahassee Open and the shot you had.
Okay, on the 17th hole, I had led that tournament from start to finish. In fact, the day before the tournament started, I'd missed qualifying. Back those days, they had a Monday qualifier. I had missed qualifying for a couple of PGA Tour events, but I knew I was playing really well, or hitting the ball really well. I just wasn't, just hadn't performed it on a one-day shootout type of thing. So anyway, I'm sitting there with a reporter, and he said, who do you think can win this week? And I looked right in the eye and said, I can. And he looked at me and said, well, you disqualified in the last 3 events. I said, doesn't matter. I'm playing well. I'm hitting it well. It's just a matter of things falling into place. So I led the tournament from the first hole, which I birdied, till the back nine started, and then I ended up tied with about 5 holes to go. I got to the 17th hole. It's a par 5, and you can reach it in 2. Well, I went for the green, close to the green. I missed it just to the right, about 10 feet off the green. And I had a one-shot lead at the moment. I was in the last group. But I knew I had to get up and down and make 4 because it was pretty easy par 5. So I knew I had to get up and down and make 4 to go to the last hole with a one-shot lead. And I had a shot sitting on some dirt or harder pans, not a whole lot of grass. The pin was cut very tight, and I had out of bounds on the other side of the green. Well, the only shot that I had a chance to get up and down with was what we call a flop shot, and it's done the way Julius Boris did it in his day and my day. Long and lazy swing, more like Phil Mickelson would do, not like Tiger, who slams the club under the ball and pops it straight up. But it was a high, soft, lazy shot. And I said, well, the only chance I have to win this tournament, if I want to win it, is to try this shot. If I don't pull it off, I'm going to hit it thin or over the green out of bounds. So what? If I do pull it off, I'm going to have a chance to win this tournament and probably will win the tournament. So I just said, okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, go. I walked up, hit the shot. I hit it. It went 4 inches from the hole. I tapped it in, made my birdie, and went to the last hole with a one-shot lead, and ended up parring the last hole, hit it 10 feet on the last hole, and won the tournament by one shot. But I took the risk of hitting the shot because I wanted to win. I could have played it safe and say, well, maybe win, maybe finish second. But I had to take the chance to do it. So I played my odds percentages. At that point, it was about 60-40, 60 for me to pull it off because I was very good at the shot, but 40% chance I would fail. I didn't think about the fear of what happens if I screw this up. I just thought about I want to have a chance to win. This is what I have to do to try to win. Now, I've practiced this shot a million times to step up here and try to let it happen.
Right, and that's a fantastic story, and that really epitomizes what we're talking about here. Is number one, obviously, Alan, you got to know your game throughout all of the years of practice and play, and as a result of that, you were able to develop and overcome. You developed your strengths, and then you were able to overcome some of your weaknesses, and as a result, you were able to play that particular shot without fear. And that's the whole point is, really to own your game, you have to understand what's going on inside. I take it this way. Let me back up for just a second real quickly here, and then, Alan, I want you to respond. A lot of people think that they have to have the picture-perfect swing out there. We know from history that that's not the case. If you look at players, Lee Trevino comes to mind, even Chichi Rodriguez and some of the other older players that played on the tour, and even Jack Nicklaus really didn't have the picture-perfect swing by today's standards. But they all were able to do the same thing consistently, and that was put the club face on the ball squarely, and they were able to put the ball where they needed it to go when they needed it to go. And sometimes they didn't, but more often than not, they did. And I think that's because they were able to understand what was going on inside. And I think once the amateur golfer out there understands that concept and spends less time worrying about whether they look good in their swing or whether everything's perfect, I think they're going to enjoy the game that much more. Would you agree with that? And I want you to finish off, if you will, Alan, if you wouldn't mind this segment, and just talking about some of the things that you see, the most common mistakes that you see the amateur golfer making.
Well, I agree with you to some degree. The Jack Nicklaus and Lee Trevino, they didn't have the maybe prettiest swings or Jim Furyk today, but they knew their swing. They knew what they were doing. Lee Trevino was a good friend of mine. I played with him, Bing Crosby, back in those days when I was an amateur. He was my partner. I was his partner, however you want to put it. But he knew his swing entirely. He knew exactly what he was doing with the club and where it was going to go. It was just his own swing, and he trusted his own swing. I think the main thing that I see people doing and not doing, number one, they don't have any routine. They just, as Cindy talks about, a pre-shot routine, which kind of sets things in motion. And second of all, they don't know what they're trying to do. I mean, I can give a lesson to somebody, and they'll hit a shot, and I'll say, why did it go there? And they say, I don't know. I just told you 10 minutes ago why it went there. I told you, explain to you what's going on and what causes it, and you don't. And 10 minutes ago, and now you don't even know what caused it to do this or that. And I'm talking about a very simple explanation, not a complicated explanation, because they're really not paying attention on what's going on. They're just thinking about the results, and you don't get anywhere in life trying just to think about the end result. You have to do a process, and people do not realize that there's a process in golf, there's a process in tennis, there's a process in business, there's a process in anything you do. And if they would pay more attention to a process, not a pretty swing, but just the process of their swing, and accept the limitations or the expectations, minimize those, and realize it's going to take a while, I think a whole lot of players would get a whole lot better, and they wouldn't be nearly as frustrated with this crazy game.
Yeah, I agree, and what a great way to end this segment. Alan, for those that are listening out there that would maybe like to get a hold of you and and gain some of your knowledge and experience, how can they do that?
They can go to my website or my email address, which is exactly the same as Cindy's. You just change the word Cindy to Allen, Allen. It's Allen at Allen Miller Golf or allenmillergolf.com.
Perfect. Cindy, if you want to do the honors, I think we have to wrap up. Unfortunately, I could stay here all day and listen to Alan, but I know we've got to end this. So if you'll do the honors and thank our guest.
Well, Alan, thank you so much for your wisdom. We really, really appreciate you being on the show, and I'm sure the listeners got some great insight to all of your total wisdom, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, honey.
It's my pleasure, and I hope the listeners will keep listening to you because I can tell them that you have really worked hard on developing your own game and giving back to the game of golf what needs to be given back to it.
Thank you.
Exactly. Well said. Thank you, Alan. You have a great day, and we look forward to actually having you come back anytime you want. You're more than welcome to.
Anytime I'm invited, I'll be happy to be back.
Sounds great. Thank you, Alan, and have a great day and much success. Thank you. Okay, that wraps up another great segment of Women of Golf, and Cindy and I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the listeners out there for tuning into the Women of Golf broadcast. We look forward to having you join us here every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time here on the Blog Talk Radio Network. So make sure that you mark that down and pencil it in or lock it in, whatever you have to do, and make sure that you check out Cindy at cindymillergolf.com and get her to help you with owning your game. Cindy, great segment, and thank you very much for bringing Alan along as well. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, and have a great week, and we will see you next week right here on the Women of Golf.